Welcome back to Basin Motorsports. So the third generation of Ford Mustang, the Fox platform, or as most of us call them, the Foxbody Mustang, have started really picking up in popularity. There are a lot of us that have had multiples over the years, have multiples now, but there are still a few that are now just getting into Fox bodies and they're not quite sure what to look for when they go look at a fresh car. Today we're going to cover the common areas that tend to have problems if you go look at a new one, or if you're looking at somebody else's build, you can kind of get an idea of is it the right one to buy and what it's going to take to finish. So here in the garage today I have two different models. They're both the early generation, what we call the 4i or the 4 headlights. I have a coupe that is a sunroof with a V8. I also have a V6 hatchback, non-sunroof, non-T-top here. We're going to go over each car a little bit from front to back, and I'm going to show you on each one if it has a particular deal, what the common things to look for, and what will need to be replaced if you find that one of these has a problem. Now, a lot of times when you go look at a Fox body, on the front end, one of the things you're going to find is that the radiator core support down here at the bottom is damaged. A lot of times people use them for jacking points where they try to lift the car. They use them to tow with, where they hook something underneath and pull forward, or they hit them on curbs or anything else in the road. So a lot of times you're going to find at the bottom of the AC condenser and the radiator itself, the core support is just a hollow tube, and it's either going to be pulled forward, damaged up, damaged in, something like that. Now these do have aftermarket support where you can buy original pieces or remade pieces. So if you find one that is damaged, it's not a deal breaker. You can always replace it with a remade factory piece, or you can look at something like a radiator core support replacement that from an aftermarket company. You would just cut off the initial OEM piece, weld on the aftermarket replacement, and then you're good to go. Now moving rearward, one of the next things you're going to find is going to be in the engine bay, and it's going to be the base of the shock towers and the top of the frame rails. On the normal V6, even the 4 cylinders in the V8, you're going to find from the factory they were very tight in there with a lot of pieces in there. Over time, the frame rails and the strut towers themselves tend to collect a lot of dirt and crud that tends to trap water down in the frame rails. So if you can kind of see down in the frame, looking down in this way, there's not a lot of room in there. So what tends to happen is you get either oil or dirt, or oil and dirt, that tends to collect down in the frame rails. On the top of them, they do have holes, and that tends to collect a lot of stuff. That collects water over time, and sometimes if it's in a wet environment or maybe during winter or anything else, it just collects water, and that means it starts to rust. So now on my V8, you can see that there's nothing in the way, so you can really kind of see down into these channels. Now these actually form a nice collective channel, so they will collect a lot of dirt and that down in the holes into this, and they tend to rust. This is a hollow channel there, and it just collects a lot of stuff over time, and if it's not cleaned out and not kept pristine, a lot of times it will start to rust. And what you'll find a lot of times is when you go look at cars, down along here you'll need to look with a flashlight and that. Make sure if these are cleaned out or not and what the condition of it is. They will rust, they will release the paint out of there, and then these become replacement options that you're going to have to do. Now very similar to the front core support or the bottom of the radiator support, there are replacements available in the aftermarket that you can reconstruct these out of sheet metal. If you cut them out, it is a large job to do, and a lot of people really kind of shed away from it. It's not terrible if you're confident in welding and painting. You can get it done. Otherwise, it may be something that you want to pass on if you find that you're not confident in your welding or to take apart the whole front of the car. Now again, a lot of the stuff is replacement. There are aftermarket pieces where people will cut off in front of these shock towers, cut off that forward and go with a full tube front end. That is an option, but again, if you're not confident in your welding, cutting, and painting, that may be something you want to pass on. Now another common area you're going to find probably is going to be damaged is going to be along the sill. So here, the bottom of the door, you have a sill here, and then you have a few pieces of metal, probably 3 pieces of metal that come together to form this bottom piece. Now a lot of times people will use this to jack the car up to take off the wheels or to do an oil change, and really you should be using the subframe mounts inside there. So So what you're going to find a lot on these is that these are going to be bent up, usually either bent in or bent out. And a lot of times going down the length of it, it's not going to be much of a problem. The only point you have where something else connects to it is the front fender piece right here where it connects down. Now, if this is bent outwards, you may find that your fender to the door doesn't sit flush. It actually sits outboard of that. So you may find that you want to come in here and take either some channel locks or something to help straighten this out. And you can use a hammer and dolly the same way. Try to straighten it out, get it back right, and then just not use that. Use the proper jack point, which is going to be either your K member in the front or along the subframe connector or the subframe along the bottom of the floor. So if you find these are all bent up, it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about cutting them out as you would some other pieces. You just want to kind of bend them straight and get them as back correct as possible. They should be vertically down, and however you do it at is going to be up to you. Channel locks, hammer and dolly. There's a few choices. Doesn't take a lot to do. It takes a lot of time just to kind of work the metal back, everything down, and work it back right. Another one of your tough area is going to be for rust is going to be this cowl area. As you can see, these will collect water and collect debris. Now I have had this cowl cover off, or the grate itself off, for a little while, so I did get pine needles and that in there. But if these tend to sit under a tree, a lot of times you will get debris along the base of the windshield, inside the cowl itself, and that will cause rust to form a lot of times. These just have a minimal amount of coating in there, and it's not going to take long for sitting in under a tree or out in a field for this to collect debris. And just like the engine bay and the frame rails, it's going to start rusting. So you got to kind of keep vigilant on that, keep things cleaned out, and you can even look through here in the side. These tend to collect debris just as easy. Now, some of the various options for the roof are going to be nothing like the hatchback has no sunroof, no T-top. There are some other limited options that include a factory sunroof, and there are going to be some that include a factory T-top. The biggest deal with sunroof and T-top is a leak. So a lot of times what you'll find is if you take out your glass here, what you'll find is that there are these drains in the corner. These drains over time tend to plug. They have water down, so water that gets in this channel, they're meant to go down in these holes, which then goes down into the body itself and comes down, kind of routes inside the body, down in, and comes out in the bottom down here. So over time, these tend to collect just the same junk that it collects everywhere else. Water transports dirt down in here, they tend to clog, and then these back up and sit and carry water. So if these don't dry out enough, what you can imagine is these tend to rust. So you're going to get a roof that is rusted, and then it needs to be replaced. Now again, you can go ahead and replace the whole roof. These are not easy to do. It might be something that you might want to just eliminate the sunroof, or you're going to have to find a donor car that will give you a roof to put in there. So if you find a car that has a sunroof or T-tops and has rust in there, what you're going to find is that it's going to be a lot to replace. This may be an actual deal breaker. If the roof is that rusty and you have to replace it, either you're going to have to do it yourself, which is going to be a lot of cutting, welding, and a lot of paint work, or vinyl, however you're going to do it, or it's going to be a lot to pay somebody in a body shop to do it. So just be cautious on that. If you find rust, make sure that it's not all the way through the metal, and if it is, be confident that you're going to have to replace at least a portion of it, and then you need to decide if you're going to pay somebody to do it or you're going to have to do it yourself. Now on the sunroofs and T-tops, there are no aftermarket options. There are no reproduction options. What you're going to have to do is to find the metal from a donor car. These are getting harder to find. People are now making the swap option. They're finding scrap cars or salvage cars, and they're swapping them over to good cars. So finding one in good shape is getting harder and harder to find. It can be done, but if you're going to do it, make sure you find a good salvage car that you can cut off the top, de-skin, and replace your potential project car. Now speaking of rust, when it comes to the sunroof and the T-tops and that, a lot of times when the seals start to degrade on those over time, they're going to allow water in. That water tends to pool at the back of the seats. So inside the floorboard there, what you'll find a lot of times is that the carpets may be wet. They may be a little bit rougher than the fronts themselves, and it could be because they've had water degradation. Now, without taking the carpets out, a lot of times if they haven't rusted through, you won't realize there is rust on the top of the floorboards. Now, I've had two different cars that have had surface rust on the rear floorboard. It did not go through, so it wasn't detectable until I took the carpet out. In that case, all you're going to have to do is just remove that rust either with a wire brush or a little bit of sandpaper and that, get it down to bare metal. You can then put on some etch primer, put on some kind of coating on the top, and then replace the carpet. Unless the floorboards themselves has completely rusted through, everything else is going to be easily fixable with just prepping the surface and getting rid of the rust so that it stops, and then kind of putting on some kind of covering, whether that is paint or sound damping, anything else. The key is just to get rid of the rust. Now, if the rust has gone through on the floorboards, it's easily detectable. Obviously, if you go under the car with a flashlight, you'll see that it has gone through. The floorboards themselves, they do have aftermarket replacements. So you can buy those, replace the whole section itself on either side, or just a small piece. With those, it's going to matter of cutting out the metal, welding it back in, and thankfully cover carpets it, so if you're not confident in your welding, you won't have to see it beyond the carpet. So with that, just prep the surface, weld it up, cover it up so it's not going to rust, and then you're going to be good to go. Now, speaking of the floors, a lot of times you're going to find that there are cracks in the metal. I've had two different cars that have had cracks. Thankfully, this 86 I'm working on does not have any cracks in the floor, but I think it's more of the rare than the normal. So a lot of times the cracks are easy to do. You just drill out on each side with a small drill bit, and then you can weld them up, and that way it stops the propagation of the crack. If you do find cracks, it's not a big deal. They're easily repaired. You don't have to replace the whole floor. Just be cognizant of that when you look under the car itself. If you can't look under the carpet, they're probably able to be seen from underneath, and just know that you're going to have to spend a little bit of time with the welder cleaning those up and getting them sealed back up so that the cracks stop propagating and that you have a weatherproof bottom floor. Now, another area under the Mustangs is going to be one of concern, and that is going to be your torque boxes. Right where the arms connect to the body, which is going to be these points here, both upper and a lower connection. A lot of times these will start to stretch, so the bolts themselves will start to oblong in there, and they may start to actually rip these metal ears away from the body. Thankfully, all of these are replaceable. There are aftermarket replacements, so if you find a car, especially the V8s that have been kind of beaten on and abused, you may find that these need to be replaced or just actually added to with some of the aftermarket kits. They're pretty easy to put in. Few hand tools, you can always weld them in also, but they do replace and strengthen your torque boxes, which I think on every car is probably a good idea. Now, probably the last area of concern on the Foxbody Mustang is going to be whether it's a hatchback or a coupe, but it's going to be down in these channels. There is going to be a weather seal on both either the hatchback, coupe, or even the convertible, which is similar to the coupes themselves. They will tend to collect material down in these channels. Very easy to clean them out, but just look for those. If there's a lot of material down in there, a lot of times they will actually collect dirt and grime in that and tend to rust, so you may have to do a little bit of rust repair there. Most of the time they're not going to rust through the metal themselves all the way into the body inside, but you may have to do a little surface prep similar to either the floorboards or anywhere else. Get rid of the rust, recoat it to make sure it's not going to re-rust, and then you're going to be good to go to either paint or do some vinyl or any other covering you like. So that kind of covers a lot of the factory deficiencies you'll find on the Foxes, whether it's going to be probably designs that kind of collect up and rust over time, or things that you're just going to have to keep an eye on to make sure that they haven't degraded. So that kind of covers the factory deficiencies that I can think of. Between the rust, cracks, or anything else you're just going to have to look for, go over thoroughly and look at as you look at either a hatchback, a notchback coupe, or even a convertible. They're going to have a lot of the same problems from kind of a factory deficiency of things that just tended to get damaged or degrade over time. Now, other things you're going to want to look for are going to be items that don't work. That could be something as simple as light bulbs that don't work, handles that don't work or are broken, trim that is missing or is falling off, trim that is damaged, or anything really just kind of looks out of place. A lot of that stuff can either be found in salvage yards if it's like trim that's not remade, or if it's light bulbs, they're easily replaced or upgraded to something similar like LEDs. In any case, a lot of that stuff is not going to be red flags. There are plenty of salvage cars out there that just to go find a set of trim, you can always look on eBay or anywhere else that sells parts. There are enthusiast groups all over Facebook and elsewhere on forums. You can still find a lot of these parts for reasonable prices. So don't be alarmed if you go look at a car just missing a few pieces, because you're going to find them out there on the internet for reasonable prices. You just got to have to be willing to look for them. And the last category on things to look out for on the Fox bodies are going to be modifications made by previous owners. There are going to be cases where you find what I say are the barn or the field finds, like this 86. This thing was pretty much all original except for a few maintenance items and a radio change. And it is going to be kind of the diamond in the rough. A little bit of rust here and there, lots of oil, and all it really needed was a restoration. Items like this still exist. They are out there. You just got to be patient and find them and snatch them up when you want them. But on the opposite side of that, you're going to find cars like this one that has been completely modified. It is so far from factory, and you're going to want to really take a good gander at what previous owners have done with the car. You may find that it has wide bodies, it has big brakes, it has big wheels, it's even been vinyl wrapped. A lot of times you're going to find that previous owners have made some questionable modifications that really have limited the value on the car, and it's going to be up to you to find if you want to buy that car, what the modifications are. Please ask plenty of questions and then decide if it's something you want to work on or work with in the future. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of things to look for when you're going to look at a Fox body. Could be your first one, could be a second one for you, or it could be just another one to add to the stable. They're all going to have common problems, they're all going to have common things to look for, so just go over them thoroughly, ask a lot of questions, and be prepared to make a list of things that are probably going to have to be fixed. A lot of times they're going to need a lot of work, but don't let that throw you off and don't think they're a red flag. There's still some great cars out there, and I hope when you're looking, you find the perfect one for you. That's it for this time. Thanks for stopping by for Basin Motorsports. We'll see you next time.